We feel like we've escaped the rat race, but we don't want to get back into it. Hello, investor, and welcome back to another episode of the Passive Income Adventures, where we help you reach your lifestyle goals powered by commercial real estate. And today is episode number 30, but I have never taken the opportunity to introduce myself or tell my backstory. So I guess I'm just going to be interviewing myself today, doing a little solo episode about our own passive income journey. I'll start out with a little bit of our history where we started investing in real estate in our first home purchase. We got some down payment assistance from the county, and we were able to get into, at the time, what seemed like a great idea was an adjustable rate mortgage, where the first year the payment was lower and it went up the third year maxed out. And I feel like our realtor did a really good job of explaining to us how this was going to work so that we were being prepared well for it. But looking back, I think that we were probably part of the problem with the subprime crash when we got into a house that we had no business owning and couldn't afford. We didn't really have an emergency fund. We didn't really bring a lot of down payment, but it ended up working out really well for us because we were able to build a lot of equity in our home, and we didn't have anything like a job loss or anything that would make it so that we had to walk away from our house or where we couldn't afford the higher payment in the last year of the adjustable rate. We lived in that house for 4 years, and I was pregnant with my third child, and I said that we needed a bigger house, that we had done everything we could to be able to fit into this house. I was really into Fly Lady at the time. My house was always spotless, and I just really felt like we didn't have any more space we could expand to fit in another baby. So we decided to buy a bigger house nearby. And my husband asked me, "Are you sure you really want to go back into this? Because when we first got that house, it was really uncomfortable for us to make that payment. And we're just going to go right back into that situation and be house poor again." Now, in the 4 years we lived in that house, he had gotten a new job and he had gotten a large raise. And I said, well, buying a new house is kind of like getting a new job. You're not going to make it doing a cost of living increase. You have to go out and find a new job. And making money in real estate seems to be a matter of buying a house, letting it appreciate, using the profit, and then doing it again. I hadn't heard this from anyone or anywhere. I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad during the time that we lived in that house, and I didn't really feel like it was a big mindset shift for me because I had already been exposed to some people at that point in my life where I knew that passive income and investment derived income versus working for your money was a thing. So most people like Rich Dad, Poor Dad because it's a mindset shift and kind of explodes your world a little bit and gets you thinking about money and personal finance and investing in a different way. But for me, I felt like I'd already had that mindset shift earlier in life, and the book left me not knowing what to do. Didn't really have any actionable insights. So I had borrowed the level 1 Rich Dad Poor Dad program from a neighbor of mine back when it was still on audio tapes and workbooks. And I went through the whole thing and I really didn't feel like it had any more information. I still didn't know what to do. And so I was a little bit turned off at that point by the whole Rich Dad Poor Dad idea. I knew that it was a thing and I believed that it was possible, but I just didn't really know what else to do. So with the distraction of children and moving, I just stuck to what I know, which was to buy a house, new construction, and let it appreciate quickly. Now, I had always wanted to do something where I could live on passive income. I remember when I was maybe 9 or 10, and I asked my mom what her parents did for a living, and she told me that they were retired. And I was aghast. Like, how do retired people make money? How are they living? I was really worried about them. And she said, oh, well, he has his Air Force pension, and he also made $1 million in the stock market, and they live off of the proceeds from that. And I don't know the words that she used or the vocabulary that she used for a 9-year-old to understand this concept, but that was the first time I was exposed to the idea that you could save up money, work hard for money, put money aside, and then let that money work for you. So in high school and early college, I became really fascinated with the stock market and trying to figure out how that whole thing worked. And I remember in a job interview, the interviewer was asking me why I wanted to work this job. It was a pretty intense door-to-door sales job, and he just wanted to make sure that I could handle the stress of it. And I said, well, I really just want to work hard during the summer so I can pay for my college, and a job like this would allow me to have enough left over that I could even invest it and then start to live off of residual income. And he said, I've never heard anybody use the words residual income in a job interview before. And I was actually kind of surprised because occasionally we'd make jokes in high school about how we were going to make $1 million in the stock market and live off the dividends. I thought everybody wanted to do this. And so it kind of surprised me when I realized nobody was really talking about it. And so again, I didn't really have a great place that I could go and learn. We did have one real estate guru that we grew up with. He was an author and sold tapes and programs and things like that. And he ended up going to prison when I was in college. And so I had a little bit of a bad taste about the whole real estate education industry. So in 2003, we bought our second home. We had 3 kids at the time, and I started teaching online graphic design classes. I was self-taught in Photoshop. I'd always had an art background, and so I had this little part-time job teaching online courses. And that was just so we had enough money to be able to go on a vacation every so often, and maybe when the kids got older, started putting in things like piano lessons or swim team. But we were definitely house poor during that time. My husband's company had a great tuition reimbursement program, so he jumped on board with that and finished his IT degree. And once he graduated, he was able to take on a part-time job in the IT field while keeping his old job. His job had a lot of freedom. It was basically an on-call position where he was on call from 8 to 5 and worked from home, and they would only go onto site a couple of times a week when they needed some work done on the equipment. We added it up one time. I think he worked a 40-hour week, maybe 2 or 3 times the entire 12 years that he worked for that company. Most of the time, he was averaging somewhere between 5 and 15 hours a week. So that gave him time to go back to school, and it also gave him time to work part-time after he graduated. He would go downtown and work in the office at his part-time job, and then if his full-time, when they needed him, he would run over to a facility and take care of it. And they liked the fact that he had a part-time job downtown because that meant that he was a little bit closer to their facility. So it was a win-win for everybody all around. And it gave us a lot of control over our income and also a lot of control over our time. If we needed more money, he would just put in more hours at his part-time job. And if we needed more time, he would just take some time off. By then, I had shifted from online courses to my own photography business, doing portraits and weddings. Then I had started doing real estate photography during the week. Now, I knew that commercial photography made more money than consumer photography, so I really zeroed in on weddings and real estate photography so that I could maximize the amount of money that I was making for the time that I was spending. I had started out with my photography business thinking that I was going to provide an affordable product for custom photography for average people. It wasn't just wealthy people who deserved to have beautiful photos, but I quickly realized that this business was very time consuming. The time I was taken away from my children, who were still very young at the time, to go out and basically make cheap photos for strangers. That the quality of my work was the same as some of the more luxury brands, and I needed to start charging more because I needed to justify the time that I was spending away from my kids by making more money so that we could do more things together, like going on more vacations or being able to afford some of the fun things that allowed us to spend more time together rather than just hanging out at home. All my kids were homeschooled by this point, and we had started talking about making a lifestyle change because we had saved up a bunch of money while my husband was working part-time and I was working part-time during the 2008 real estate crash. We were really living the Dave Ramsey lifestyle. We didn't have any debt other than our home. We had one car that we shared as a family, really living very frugally, still house poor from our payment. And the house wasn't really going up in value or appreciating. The money that we had made off the house that we lived in for 4 years was the down payment that we made on the house that we were living in at the time. Now, the value of that house never dropped below what we owed on it, so we were never underwater on it, but we certainly were not making any money on the appreciation because the real estate market was hit so hard during that time. And we knew that, like Dave Ramsey said, when you're expecting some sort of a crisis because you have some medical problem or your job is looking unstable, that you should really push pause on any other plans and just pile up a much larger emergency fund. So that's exactly what we did. We saved up money for probably about 2 years, and we had maybe $100,000 in cash at that point from both of our part-time jobs. At that point, we figured there really wasn't a risk of him getting laid off anymore because he'd made it through that 2008, 2009 problem. So in 2010, we started looking for a new home. We decided that we wanted to have some more property. I had some chickens back in there, and the HOA was starting to get on my case about having them, all sorts of other rules. And we were just feeling kind of constricted living in a neighborhood. Our kids didn't really have any friends nearby. A lot of them had moved away. And we just said, we're just going to move out to the country. So we started looking around and we found 5 acres about half an hour from our house and put in an offer on it. And it took nearly a year to get that house. That was worth a lot more than anybody else thought it was worth. So we finally moved into that house and it was a complete disaster. We knew it was going to be a total remodel gut job. And so we ended up taking all that cash that we had saved up and putting that into the home on the renovations. We basically kept the foundation and 3 of the walls. We ripped off the whole back, added onto it, put on a new roof, completely changed the floor plan, moved all the electrical and the plumbing. And we spent about a year and a half doing all of the work ourselves. We were both handy people. We were raised in handy families. And so we felt confident that we could do this, but with 2 people, especially me with a new baby, it was just taking way too long. And my husband had also been laid off in 2011 right after we bought that house. Now, the company was based in California, so he had 60 days notice. So he was never actually out of a job. His part-time job actually picked him up full-time. And then after that, one of the founders had left that company. And so we approached him and asked if we could go to his new company with him. So at this time, my husband was working full-time, which is not what we were planning on. We were planning on him being able to still work part-time and have a lot of control over his time and his income. So if we needed more money in order to fix up the house, we could. But if we needed more time to fix up the house, we'd also have that. But that plan changed just a few weeks after we moved into the house. And we also found out that we were pregnant with a baby that we were not expecting to have. And so that 2011, end of that, early 2012 was pretty challenging because we now had this big project that we were sitting on without the time or the means to be able to do it justice. So we really went through that entire pile and then some. We got credit cards from both Home Depot and Lowe's and took out a line of credit from our credit union so that we could afford to pay the labor. So when we got all done with the renovations, at the end, we ended up hiring a contractor to finish it out for the last 6 months. And it ended up being a really good experience because not only were we able to gain experience hands-on of doing this DIY remodel, but we also got the experience to be managing a contractor for the first time, understanding how to do bids and schedules and how to keep everybody accountable for what they needed to be accountable for, not only our subs, but the general contractor that we ended up hiring at the end. If you're going to be in real estate investing, it's really important that you understand something about construction and construction management because that can really make or break a business plan. So in 2013, we ended up refinancing that house. We went to the bank and we had enough equity in the house that we could get a home equity loan and then use that home equity loan to pay off the underlying mortgage, pay off the line of credit, both credit cards, and we still had enough money left over that we could pay cash for a car. We had 6 kids at that point and we no longer fit in our car. So we had been driving around in a car that was too small for us for a year. So the whole family could never go anywhere all at one time. To buy a new car, we needed a bigger car to fit our entire family. We had put an extra seat into one of our minivans so we could all fit into that one, but it really wasn't a long-term solution as the kids were getting bigger. That was our first exposure to doing some sort of alternative financing. The home equity loan actually ended up being a lower interest rate and only a 20-year term versus a 30-year term that our mortgage was. It was fixed and the payment actually ended up being slightly lower than what we were paying, borrowing less money at a higher interest rate for a longer period of time. So we really felt like we had won on that home equity loan refinance. And at the time, we didn't know that this was a thing. Maybe it wasn't a thing at the time, but later on the Burr book came out from David Green about buy, rent, refinance, renovate, whatever it was, and repeat. And so we had inadvertently done this with this home equity loan. So we were living much more comfortably in the house. We could totally afford the payment. We had our second car, saving up money again, replenishing our emergency fund. And we had all these plans about how we were going to subdivide the back of the lot off and build self-storage back there. One of our neighbors at our previous house had developed self-storage facilities, and he was always trying to help us figure out how to start a business doing the same thing. But we didn't know about investors and taking out commercial mortgages at that point. We felt uncomfortable with that. We feel like we had to bootstrap it and pay cash for everything. And so we were never really making much progress. We ended up renting out the back to a microbrewer who started construction on a brewery and then didn't finish it. And so it just ended up being one thing after another that we'd try and nothing really ever panned out. We felt like that house was in the path of progress and would eventually probably be converted to a commercial building because even though it had acreage and it felt like it was out in the country, on the front side of it, it was really on a very busy road and they were rerouting a state highway to go right past it. So we felt like, hey, we could sell this house someday as a commercial building. And the company that my husband was working for at the time was planning an initial public stock offering and we had a bunch of options and we thought, okay, these two things are really our ship that are going to come in. And of course, neither one of those ships came in. In 2017, he was laid off from that position and the company had never gone public. It was one of those situations where he was not at a California company. He didn't need any notice. He just showed up at the house in the middle of the day. And we all know what that means. If they're not sick, then they've lost their job. So we frantically started looking for a new job, went into panic mode. I was making enough as a wedding and real estate photographer that I could pay the bills, but we were short a little bit and we'd have to dip into our emergency fund every month for who knows how long we could have made that stretch out. We were thinking probably 6 months, but we knew the longer we went without him having a job, the longer it would take us to recover that emergency fund after. So we didn't want to use it, but we were glad that we had it because if we hadn't had it, we really would have been in panic mode. So we did all the things, talked to all the recruiters, went to all the networking events, and no job was coming. And so he ended up expanding his search to look outside of Austin, where we were living at the time. We'd been there about 20 years, and this farm that we had was supposed to be like the forever home. We were going to wait till our baby graduated high school and then maybe sell the house to some sort of a commercial purpose once that highway was finished. So we were thinking we had another good 10 to 15 years in that house. At the time, I was still doing my real estate and wedding photography photography, and I was also doing some marketing contracting for some local companies, including the new startup that the founder of the company who had just laid him off, he left as well and went and started a new company, and I was doing some marketing contracting for them. I had just graduated college. I went back in 2014 that I had my associate's degree from, was piloting their online program and giving me a great tuition break if I piloted their bachelor's degree program. So I finished up my degree in about 2017, and he got laid off just a couple of months later. So when we started opening ourselves up to looking in other cities, I really wanted to stay in the niche industry that I was in, doing marketing for our local professional rugby team. And so we started looking in other cities that had a rugby team so that I could stay in that job, stay in that industry. So Salt Lake City was one of the options on the list that we gave our recruiter, and we immediately found a job in Salt Lake. And about 6 weeks after he got laid off, we were up and packing to move across the country, leaving that forever home. And we never were able to sell it as a commercial property. That highway hadn't even been finally approved yet. And we just really felt like we were missing out on all of the opportunities that we had to really build wealth. And our plan, once we had some cash in our hands, was to pay off our mortgage and then start saving up to pay cash for a rental house, just like the Dave Ramsey baby steps said. But we never really felt like we were getting ahead. We had a big family, and we were always seeming like we were just keeping our heads above water by paying our monthly bills and having this emergency fund. And we were never really making progress beyond that. Our kids were starting to get older. By the time we moved in 2016, our oldest was already off at college. And I felt like you can't go back and relive you as parents. And we had always been scrimping and saving, and we were just never really able to do those extra things. And we certainly didn't have enough left over to give much more than just a tithe to our church. I really wanted to identify some charities that we could support lavishly, or maybe even start a nonprofit of our own. I had several ideas, and I even wrote some papers about them when I went back to college about the nonprofits that I wanted to start after I graduated. But we just never had the abundance that we needed to get past just that basic level of living well, being middle class. My husband especially struggled with the idea of pursuing wealth. He felt like that would make him greedy, and as long as he had enough to pay for what he needed to do, then that was enough. But when I realized how much more we wanted to do and help our community, but we weren't able to, I asked him, I said, what would you do if you had more money than you actually needed? And he started talking about all the things that he would do to help other people. And that was when I think the light kind of went off in both of our eyes, that we wanted to do something bigger than we were currently able to do, and we wanted to grow from there. So it was kind of depressing when we moved to Salt Lake. Even though the job he got actually paid a lot better, it made up for what I was losing by leaving my business behind. Very location-based business. All of my search engine optimization was for the Austin area, and it would have taken me time to build up another clientele, both wedding clients and also real estate clients. So when we got to Salt Lake City, I was just really lost and not knowing what to do. We decided to rent a home so we could get to know the area. We hadn't spent much time there, even though my dad grew up in the area. We didn't really know it that well, and so we didn't feel comfortable buying a house so quickly. So we thought we'd rent for 2 years, maybe even more, while we were looking for a great neighborhood and a great house to buy. And this was in the period when everybody was expecting the real estate market to just crash back in early 2018. We were still at the top of a bull market, and we thought, oh, we wait a year or two while we're figuring it out. And when prices start to depress, then we can go out and grab something. But the prices just continued to go up. And so just a couple of months after moving into the house, we decided we needed to buy a home. And we really liked our neighborhood, so we ended up buying a house right around the corner from our rental house and subleasing that out to another family. But what really got us to the point where we were ready to buy a house was I was looking around trying to see some job that I could do. I only wanted to work part-time. I had learned that from my photography business, that if I was going to spend time away from my family, it had better really be worth it financially. But I knew I didn't want to work full time. Even though my youngest at this time was 5 and they were homeschooled, they didn't need me every minute of every day. So I had a lot of spare time that I could use to start a business or work part-time. But I really wasn't looking forward to starting another business. I was getting burned out on the photography. I was getting older, and the camera was starting to hurt my hands, and it was just a lot of hustle, and I didn't really feel like it was making that much money. But I didn't know what else I could do. With a business degree, entrepreneurial management, I felt like it was very valuable. I was learning a lot about how to manage startups, large startups, how to fund them with seed rounds, angel, Series A and B fundraising, and venture capital, and all of these types of things that at the time I didn't realize would be useful in my real estate business. But it wasn't a great degree to have to where I could go out and get a job, especially not a part-time job, and really be earning the top of my income potential. I just was very frustrated. So I started attending a lot of local business networking events, and I was thinking about starting a small business consulting firm where I would help people with their marketing and their bookkeeping. Most small business owners are technicians and are really good at landscaping or fixing cars or doing web design, but I knew that small businesses were always cash strapped, and I didn't really know if that would be a lucrative thing to do, if I would be able to get what I felt like I needed to get in order to justify taking the time away from my kids to go do that. So I was just feeling really lost. And I ended up at a business networking event that I had been seeing online, advertised on the Meetup website. And so I showed up, and it was a pitch for real estate education from some guru program. And I felt really disappointed and that I had been misled thinking this was going to be a business networking event. But really what it was a presentation on signing up for this expensive education. And so the host of the event, I pulled him aside and I said, hey, I really felt like this was misleading and I was going to come to a business event. And they were, of course, trying to sell me the program. And I said, I don't want this to be a rich dad, poor dad thing where I come and spend $3,000 on this and then the next level is 10 and I'm still not getting anywhere. And tens of thousands of dollars down the line, I still haven't gotten anything of value. So I sat down and I said, tell me exactly what you sell, every product, every tier. And so they showed me everything that was available. And it wasn't that bad, actually. I thought, okay, I actually had the money for this. We'd sold our Texas house. We had pocketed more money than we'd ever seen in our lives. And we were just about to have that delivered to our bank account when we closed on that sale. And I was trying to figure out what to do with it. And I know now a lot of people are in that position. They sell a house, they exit a business, they get an inheritance or a judgment or settlement, and they have more money than they've ever seen in their lives. And they really want to make sure that they can take care of it. And so I was in that same position that many of you are in, where you're wondering, hey, how do I turn this into some passive income? And I said, do I really want to spend part of that on an expensive education system? So I went home, and for the first time, I actually Googled real estate investing. The only thing I had done prior to that was in our last neighborhood house where one of my neighbors, his uncle was a real estate author and guru. And so I had looked him up and looked at his books, and I started reading up on many different authors and their reputations, and found the guy that I grew up with who went to prison on the do not follow list. But other than just that research into people who were teaching these things, I had never really done much. And I certainly didn't want to buy a program back then. And I didn't want to buy a program now, and I didn't want to buy a program at that time either. Even though I could finally afford it, I just didn't think that that was the best use of my cash. So in the process of researching this organization, I came across the Bigger Pockets website. If you Google real estate investing these days, you're going to come up with Bigger Pockets. And so I started reading the forums there about this program. And a lot of people were saying, well, why would you spend that much money on a program when you can join your local RIA organization for $150 a year? And I had never heard of a RIA at that point. And so I quickly looked it up and I saw that there were 3 of them in my area. So I started attending and joined all 3 of them. Started networking, and attending all the presentations was really a turning point for me because I was seeing many people making money in their real estate businesses or from real estate investing in many different ways. And what I really connected with right away was the more scalable and more passive commercial real estate. At least I thought it was more passive at the time. So I started looking for commercial buildings. During that time where we closed on our house and before I was ready to buy anything, I took that cash and I didn't know what to do with it. I knew I had to invest it short term. I had a friend in Austin who managed a mutual fund, and he always counseled us to never invest anything that you need within 5 years. But I didn't want it just sitting in a bank for a couple of years while we were waiting to buy a house. So at a real estate club, I asked if anybody needed a hard money loan. When we had purchased our property, our acreage, our realtor was an investor, and he was telling us about a flip that he was doing where he was using a hard money loan to do it. So I knew that this was a thing, a private lending world, but I didn't really know anything about it. So I started asking around at one of the RIA meetings if anybody needed to borrow some money to do a flip. Sure enough, everybody was looking for some money to do a flip. I didn't really realize what I was stepping into at the time. But somebody came highly recommended. Many of the other members had invested with him or loaned him money. And so I went ahead and I loaned him the entire pile of cash that we had, which looking back was probably one of the dumbest things I ever did. But I spent some time vetting him out. He came highly recommended. He definitely had been doing it a long time and knew what he was doing. And I couldn't find any judgments against him or any complaints. And he actually became a very good mentor to me. It ended up working out really well. So he encouraged us to buy our house, and he recapitalized a portion of our loan that we could take to pay cash for the down payment that we needed on the house that we purchased. And then a couple of months later, I found a rental house that I wanted to purchase, and we had a little bit of money. So I went ahead and put the down payment on that one by myself. And then I found a second rental house that I wanted to purchase. And this is all through the RIA members. They were doing cash buyers lists where they were out finding inexpensive homes. And then I would purchase them from the wholesaler that was in my real estate club. And then I would fix it up and rent it out. We had tried to purchase a 14-unit building, but we couldn't get a loan because we didn't have any experience. And we also had just enough to cover the down payment, but not enough left over in an emergency fund fund, but not enough left over to be an emergency fund that the lender wanted. So they encouraged us to find somebody to sign on the loan with us who had a little bit more cash in the bank and also somebody who had experience managing rental houses. And I just didn't really feel comfortable at that time with any of the people I'd met in my club. They were still too new to me to ask them to sign on my loan. And the person that I had done, and the individual that I had loaned money out to, he didn't do anything in partnerships. And so he wasn't interested in partnering on that opportunity with us, which looking back might have been better for both of us if we had partnered up on that first opportunity. So that's why I started going after the smaller rental homes. I was trying to get some experience so that we could purchase some sort of a 8 to maybe 14 unit building, just my husband and me, and that we could run ourselves without partners and be kind of a legacy property for our kids. So I quickly realized when we were looking at that 14 unit property that the cash flow that was spinning off was enough to replace my husband's income just from that one property. And that really shifted my mindset when I started to think, okay, yes, I can invest in real estate. I can do this. The RIA clubs were giving me the confidence and the exposure and the network I needed to believe that I could do it and finally have that actionable insight that was so missing from all my time kind of messing around and playing with things and not really getting into it. So instead of just being a panic protection from another layoff, it became something that I realized this could retire my husband, it could retire me, we could really change our lives and live on passive income. And all of this was made possible by investing in our own personal homes. And so my husband said, take the cash that we made off of that personal home and we're just going to treat it like monopoly money. Use that to go out and start a real estate investing business. And he was just going to make sure that our home and our personal expenses were such that he could support it with his income alone. So we put aside a big emergency fund and took the rest of the money and started a real estate investing business. By the time I had found the third rental, my borrower was just kind of laughing. He said, you keep asking for money back. So he just went out and raised some more money and cashed me out of that loan. It took about a year that I had that lent out to him. So during that period of time, I went from not knowing anything to wanting to buy my third rental home. So he cashed out that loan on that house that he was renovating. It took forever. It shouldn't take that long. I think it was the longest house he ever owned. I think he finally ended up turning it into an Airbnb because it just was not selling, which was odd because in 2018, 2019, when he had that house on the market, it was a hot time of the market. So it was really strange that he couldn't sell it, but it gave me the time that I needed to learn. So I wasn't upset about it. Right after I bought that third rental property, I found the first commercial property that I ended up buying. I had been looking at several of them. Like I said, there was a 14 unit and a 5-plex and some other projects we were looking at, but none of them ever panned out. But the act of going after them as if I could buy them was extremely educational. I was able to run numbers, do research, talk to people, talk to lenders, expand my network. Even though I ended up not buying it, I learned a lot from it. And so we tried to buy several commercial projects, but the first one we actually purchased was one that I found in probably July of 2019, and it took us 6 months to close on. I don't think we closed on it until March of 2020, which was just a couple of weeks before everything was shut down with COVID, maybe just a couple of days. By that time, I already had another commercial property under contract I had found from a commercial wholesaler, and I put together a group just off of LinkedIn that I was looking for some partners. I had a little cash. My partners brought in some cash and we closed on that. So we had now at that point, it was 3 commercial properties. So the one we bought in Idaho and the 2 we bought in Arkansas. So I was really catching the fire of commercial real estate and immediately started looking for our next property. And I put something under contract that was much larger than anything we had done before. It was a high-rise entitlement in downtown Salt Lake City where we found a couple of warehouses. We were going to knock them down and build a high-rise apartment building. So we purchased a couple of these lots. Again, I put together a group off of LinkedIn, and people who had heard me interview on podcasts came and said that they'd like to work with me. And so we purchased that project and got to work doing the permits and the engineered architectural drawings for 150, 60, something like that unit high-rise in downtown Salt Lake City. During that time, I had also put another building under contract in Texas that was, again, larger than anything we had done before. And the high-rise project was going so that I think I was maybe feeling a little overconfident in my ability to raise capital. It was a $5 or maybe a $6 million raise on the Texas property. I brought in several people who were capable of raising about $1 million each, and we just were making decent traction, but I wasn't making decent traction. Most of the people that I had worked with at that point wanted to do joint ventures and be active investors. I didn't really know a lot of people who wanted to be limited partners, meaning you just put money into a deal and then you go back to your business or your job and work that while you just wait for the cash to come in, basically mailbox money. So I was not doing well with a capital raise on that personally, and we had lost our loan guarantor. It was a large loan, so our commercial broker had introduced us to somebody who could sign on a loan that size, who had the experience and the net worth to be able to do it. But when we actually actually ended up getting our loan quote. They didn't like our loan guarantor because he'd signed on another loan with them during COVID, and that property went through some hard times. So even though he was able to turn it around, it basically got him put on the do not fly list with that lender. So we didn't know anybody else who could guarantee that loan. I didn't feel like the capital raise was going well. We had earnest money that was hard from day one, and we were coming up on another deadline to put more earnest money down on it. And I just said, I don't feel comfortable. I don't know if we can get this done. And so we decided as a group to walk away from that project, and I lost probably $70,000. But I was also coming off of a big win because we'd sold our high-rise project to our general contractor. So with that, I was able to cover the losses on the property that we lost, as well as have enough left over to put aside a year's worth of income. In that same year, we sold both of our Arkansas properties. So my losses were more than covered by my gains that year. But I remember just feeling relieved after we didn't buy that property in Texas because I was going to be the managing partner on that project. I did not want to spend the next 5 years managing that project, hearing about problems with plumbing and something caught on fire and something crashed and somebody's not paying their rent. I just wasn't enjoying the asset management on the buildings that we had. And we had just sold 3 projects, and I was so relieved to sell them and so relieved at that one that I didn't buy that I really had a moment where I had to turn inside and look and say, what am I doing here? I'm trying to get my husband out of his rat race only to enter into my own rat race. It was like the second rat race. After we get out, is it really getting out if you're just going back to being self-employed in a business that's taking a lot of your time and mental energy? People make jokes that becoming an entrepreneur is the only time that you trade a 40-hour-a-week job for an 80-hour-a-week job. And not only was I trading it up for an 80-hour-a-week job, but I wanted my husband to quit his job and come work in the business where he could spend 80 hours a week working. And just realized that it was out of alignment with our goals, which was to help retire early. We were approaching 50. Our kids were starting to move out of the house. We just didn't really feel like running a business or scaling a big real estate syndication or commercial syndication business was a good fit for our goals. So I spent a couple of months just reevaluating where I was going and why I was going there. I think I had gotten caught up in the hustle culture and the crush it culture, and it just really was not a good fit for where we were in our lives. But I also realized it wasn't a good fit for me generally. One of the reasons I never scaled my photography business, despite my husband encouraging me to hire some more photographers and book more weddings, I didn't want to run a business. I had a friend that I used to contract for her doing weddings, and watching all the problems that they had when the photographer didn't show up or they got a bad review. And I just thought, I never really want to run a business like that. And here the syndication business was turning into that. Things were falling through the cracks. I didn't want to hire help like virtual assistant or executive assistant. I didn't want to have employees. I just didn't want to do it. And I realized, again, from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, in the cash flow quadrant, that there are certain types of people, and the personality that I identified most with was the investor, not the business owner or the entrepreneur, certainly not the employee. I wanted to put my money to work for me so that I could live off of the passive proceeds. I knew that that was going to be a lot of money that I needed to have invested. $1.2 million will yield $100,000 or $120,000 per year if you are investing it at an average of 10%. I knew some projects were going to do a lot better than that, but I also knew some projects were going to do a lot worse than that. And I figured I could probably average 10%, live off 10% of our income pretty safely. But $1.2, $1.7 million, depending on what rate of return you can expect. And I only had a half to maybe a third of that. And so I think the experience of actively investing was helpful for me because I was able to turn that money into more money more quickly because I was working. I was creating money out of thin air by having a job or a business. But I knew that once we hit critical mass, that we had $1 million of cash invested in equity and cash flowing projects, that I did not want to work anymore. And then I would have this big business, and what was I going to do with it? And just shut everything down, start selling properties? I felt like this was a trap or a rabbit hole that I was getting sucked into that I didn't want to be into. And so instead, what I decided to do was look at why the project in Texas failed, where the bottleneck was, and see if I could come up with a solution for that. We didn't have enough money to buy the property, really is what it boiled down to. I didn't feel confident that we could build the down payment that we needed from our investors. And so I went back and talked to my investors, and why many of them ended up not investing is they wanted to be joint venture hands-on partners, because that was typically what I'd been doing up to that point. And they thought that eventually they could jump in on one of those projects. And so I was talking to my attorney, one of my partners, on a building we had just bought. It was the last building that I acquired. I believe that was in June of 21. And I said, why can't we just put people together in a group instead of becoming a general partner and having to put in $300,000, $500,000 or $1 million into a single deal just so they can get their hands on the management? Why can't we just put them in like 50, 100 grand per person and form some sort of an LLC where we get together and we come in as a single entity? And he said, well, that's an investment club. And I had never really heard of that before, that it was a legal term or something that the SC actually had rules about how to run these. So I went down that rabbit hole. And I thought, well, this is great. I'm sure I can find somebody running one of these, but I couldn't. I could find plenty of people running stock investing clubs, but I didn't know anybody running a commercial real estate investing club where we could actually negotiate to be joint venture partners rather than limited partners. It was a very unique concept. And I spent months talking to other people, looking, interviewing people, trying to find it, talking to attorneys to structure it properly. And I finally realized nothing like it existed. And so we went ahead and started our custom investing club where people can negotiate with their pool of cash. We go in together for better terms, better returns, and management shares. But during the time of running that club, basically what we discovered was there were a lot of people who would do a deal with the club as joint venture, and they would come to the same part two. Well, what we discovered while we were running this investing club is there were people that would jump in and do a joint venture deal who loved it, and they would go and start their own syndication businesses and start putting offers on their own properties. And there were people who didn't love it. They were just like me, where once they got involved in the asset management on these properties we were looking at, they didn't like it. They felt like it was kind of a burden. And so what they had agreed to do, they found themselves being like, I don't want to do it. And they would ask, can we just invest in this as a limited partner? So during the course of that, I discovered that there were several people that I really enjoyed working with because they were experts in their fields. They had their own cash and they did what they said they were going to do every single time. In fact, they were so committed to what we were doing that they would often pick up the slack for the people who didn't enjoy running it or had some kind of crisis come up in their lives and they couldn't fulfill the obligations that they'd made to their club management duties. So I asked them if they wanted to start a fund just for limited partners, for people who were not enjoying the management side of things, people who'd come through the club and just decided, hey, this isn't really a good fit for me. And since we had done several deals in the club together already, we were already technically business partners in those club deals. And so several of us broke off. And so several of us joined forces and started a fund where we raised capital for other people's deals using limited partner investors. It helps me. I love that we have options for both people who want to be hands-off limited partners and focus on their businesses and their careers or their high income opportunities and have discovered or already know that they don't want to start a real estate business on the side. They don't want a side hustle or a second career. But we also have an option for people who do. Now, there are a lot of places where limited partners can invest their capital in various funds. Those are easy to find. But the club is extremely unique. I don't know of any other joint venture clubs that are running right now. When I find one, so the uniqueness of the club is self-evident in the fact that it's the only one that I know of that's running. The uniqueness of the fund, even though, like I said, there are lots of places where people can invest their money in different kinds of funds, and I do encourage that, some level of diversity with different operators and different projects. What makes our fund unique is that those of us who are running it are already retired on passive income, either semi, meaning we're self-employed part-time, or completely retired on our passive income, and we have moved on to the second part of our journey where we are now doing more passion projects, doing the work that really means a lot to us. So that gives us an insight into you as a limited partner because we've had those goals, we've walked that path, and we're succeeding at that journey. And the other thing that I realized when we started the club is there are a lot of really great asset managers out there, great operators who were running businesses and taking it very seriously and really enjoyed the part of the business of keeping everything running, working with the property managers, starting their own property management companies. And I just realized that I felt safer investing my money in a deal where the asset managers were very hands-on and very active than I did investing with someone like me who was really in it for a few years just so that they could retire. And I thought there's so many, once we started putting these club deals together, we were finding so many more great deals being brought to us. So instead of sifting through things that the broker was bringing us that were overpriced, that we were trying to make offers on and competing with a lot of other buyers, we were now having deals gift wrapped brought to our door. They'd already been through due diligence. They'd already been through underwriting and due diligence. They were already under contract and they were just looking for investors to come in and cover their portion of the down payment that they needed to close the loan. And so it ended up going from most deals we were looking at to acquire ourselves being terrible and we were spending a lot of time screening to having most deals that were brought to us being at least based hits. And we really could cherry pick the best ones, the best returns, but also the best operators. So that's what we've turned our attention to doing in the fund. So that's what we're working on right now. Kind of gives you a sense of what we were doing in the past, what we're working on in the present. And just want to share a little bit about where we're going in the future from here, because I'm at this strange part of our passive income journey where we've retired on our passive income, but we're not really retired. So in the financial independence retire early movement, there's a term known as lean fire, where your income covers your basic expenses, but it's really not enough to upgrade your lifestyle. And sometimes it's not even enough to maintain your current lifestyle. You really need to slash your expenses, move to a cheaper house, not buy a new car, no vacations. It's a very frugal lifestyle, but you're being supported by the passive income. Now, during lean fire is when you usually become self-employed to find something to do either part-time or for just money to invest. You don't need the money to live off of, but you need the money to continue to invest so you can increase your cash flow so you can achieve something that they call fat fire, meaning that your passive income now not only supports your basic expenses, but it supports your increased lifestyle desires as well as your desire to serve others and have an abundance that you can give back to your community through some sort of nonprofit or philanthropic efforts. So it feels sometimes strange to say, hey, we're retired on passive income when we're retired to self-employment part-time. It's just a really strange place to be. We have slashed our expenses dramatically so that we could walk away from our jobs earlier and then reclaim that time that we were spending on my husband's job and being able to have more time freedom so that we could work on building this business together, but still keep it part-time. So last spring, he was laid off again, and the difference was incredible. There was no sense of panic. In fact, he was thinking of quitting at the end of January anyway. So it was 5 years to the day, Thanksgiving of 2022, that he was laid off from Thanksgiving of 2017. And so we had both of these experiences right before Christmas, and it was just amazing to see the difference in ourselves that we just weren't worried. We had enough passive income coming in to cover our basic expenses, even if it would be tight. And we'd already taken steps at that point to lower our living expenses dramatically. The advantage of him getting laid off versus quitting was then he got a severance package. So he was able to take that time that he would have been working in December and January and start working on our business immediately. He was also able to start looking for a job before the time that his severance ran out. And so while he was looking for a job, he was able to collect unemployment. So we knew that we now had a lot more location freedom as well because he didn't have a particular office that he was tied to. So we decided to go hike the Arizona Trail last spring. We had our kids with us. So it took us 3 months to do the 800-mile hike from the Mexico border to the Utah border. And that was an experience in and of itself. I'll probably do an entire episode about what we learned about ourselves and our financial situation by being away and off grid for that amount of time. So what he had done for the unemployment while we were hiking the Arizona trails, every time we found a signal, he would apply for new jobs, set up interviews, and do his unemployment paperwork while we were hiking. We were still very open to him finding a job, and we even still are at this point because we feel like every dollar that we earn is more dollars that we have to invest. We had been wanting to go to Florida on an extended vacation for quite a number of years, actually. And so we finally decided, just let's make it happen. So after we finished hiking, we've been traveling around the United States, spending time with my husband's family in Idaho before we end up on the East Coast. We're going to go spend some time with my family, meet some other investors along the way. And recently our car broke down. So we ended up back in Idaho at my husband's parents' house. He grew up in an auto shop, actually. So they're fixing the car. We'll probably just buy an RV and do the RV life for a while. Live in Florida for a couple of months and just see where our investing business takes us next and continue to try and earn capital so that we have more money to invest. So that's the next phase of our journey, is keeping ourselves out of rat race number 2, that we feel like we've escaped the rat race, but we don't want to get back into it by being forced into a job or starting a business that just creates another job for us. And we finally feel like we have enough control over our lives that we can choose whether or not we want to have a W-2 or a 9-to-5. We are able to be much more discriminating about what types of jobs we're going to be looking at. You know, they're going to be remote so that we can still travel. And we're really enjoying the group that we're working with right now on our fund. They're really exceptional people who have hit success in the business world in real estate or other careers. And we knew we didn't want to start a fund if it was just going to be another business and another rat race. And so we really spent almost 2 years before starting this fund looking for the right team to do it, and finally found it. And here we are off the ground, ready to accept investments this last couple of months and investing in our first projects together with our investors through this fund. The club continues to grow. We are looking at new deals almost every single week. And we are working on offering some education for people who want to get started in commercial real estate, who want to invest with us as a group. And just putting those resources out there that we wish had been out there when we were first starting. So that's our story. That is our experience with real estate and commercial real estate investing and entrepreneurship, and helping us to figure out what our goals are, where we're going from here, and how we take a step back, look at what we're doing right now, how that fits into where we're headed, and being able to readjust our course as needed. We're definitely in another period of that right now where we're just trying to figure out what comes next. But the difference is, instead of a sense of panic or urgency, we have this time and this ability and this mental clarity to really dig deep and drill down into what it is we want. So even though that's a difficult process, it is a welcome process that we are really excited about, that we get to experience that right now. And that's one of the beauties that passive income has given us. It's completely changed our family over the last 5 years. And not only has it been really exciting to see where we were versus where we are right now, but to have that same excitement looking forward, that we can continue to build what we have learned over the last 5 years and be able to do more than we ever have done before for our kids and for our communities. So if this resonates with you, I'd love to talk to you after the show. The purpose of this podcast is to network and connect people, and it allows us to have a voice to speak to many more people than we would be able to just in our local communities. We can't wait to hear from you and to learn from one another and go on this journey together. Thank you for coming along on another passive income adventure. If you want to contact me, you can reach out at our new website, which is Rise.co, where you can schedule a call to talk more about our investing options, either through our fund or our club. If you want to come to the club meetings, the website for that is risecapitalclub.com, and there's a button right there where you can jump in on the meeting, and a calendar widget so that you can add reminders to your own calendar to join us every week. And if you'd like to follow us on social, I'm on LinkedIn at Emma Powell 28. That's all for now. I'll catch you on the next one.